The city that dared to touch heaven. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine stepping through a gateway so tall it blocks out the sun. The air around you shimmers with heat, thick with the smell of roasting lamb, burning cedar oil, and the faint copper tang of the Euphrates River just beyond the walls. You hear 1,000 voices, merchants haggling, priests chanting, donkeys braying under impossible loads of grain and lapis lazuli. Children dart between the legs of soldiers in bronze armor. A woman pours water from a clay jug onto the cracked earth at her doorstep. Somewhere in the distance, a drum beats a slow, hypnotic rhythm. You have just arrived in Babylon. And here is the first thing you need to understand. Everything you think you know about this place, every image your mind has assembled from movies, from Sunday school stories, from half-remembered history lessons, is almost certainly wrong. The real Babylon was not a cartoon of sin and decadence. It was not a fantasy kingdom of flying carpets and veiled women. It was something far stranger, far more complex, and in many ways, far more terrifying than anything Hollywood has ever dared to show you. Babylon was, at its peak, the largest and most sophisticated city on the face of the earth. It was home to perhaps 200,000 people, a number almost incomprehensible in a world where most human beings spent their entire lives within walking distance of where they were born. It had paved streets, it had running water channels, it had a postal system, a banking system, a legal code. It had libraries, it had mathematicians who understood the movements of the stars with breathtaking precision. And yet, if you were somehow transported there today, if you woke up tomorrow morning in the heart of Babylon at the height of its power, somewhere around 600 BCE, during the reign of the great Nebuchadnezzar II, you would be dead within 24 hours, maybe less. Not because the Babylonians were savages, not because the city was lawless, quite the opposite. You would be destroyed by the very systems that made Babylon great, by its rigid social hierarchies, its brutal legal code, its deadly diseases, its extreme climate, and by your own catastrophic lack of knowledge about how to survive in a world that bore almost no resemblance to the one you know. So, stay with me, because over the next 2 hours, we are going to walk through the gates of Babylon together. We are going to live a single day in this ancient city, from the first pale light of dawn to the terrifying darkness of night. And at every step, we will discover exactly why this brilliant, beautiful, magnificent civilization would kill you before the sun went down. This is not a story about ancient people being primitive. This is a story about how alien the past truly is, and how fragile you are in it. Before the gates open, the world you left behind. Before we walk through those famous blue-glazed gates, the Ishtar Gate, the entrance to the most powerful city of the ancient world, we need to understand something about the body you are bringing with you. You are carrying approximately 100 trillion bacteria, fungi, and microorganisms in and on your body right now. Most of them are harmless. Many of them are essential to your survival. But here is the crucial thing. They are your microbiome, the invisible ecosystem of your particular time and place. And that ecosystem has been shaped by the world you live in, by processed foods and antibiotics, by chlorinated water and hand sanitizer, by 1,000 years of accumulated immunity to diseases that no longer exist. When you step into ancient Babylon, you are not just traveling through time, you are transplanting that fragile modern ecosystem into a world it has never encountered. The Euphrates River, which provided Babylon with its lifeblood, its water, its food, its trade, its very identity, was also a masterclass in waterborne pathogens, schistosomiasis, typhoid, cholera, dysentery. The water that ancient Babylonians drank every single day would, in modern terms, constitute a biological hazard. They had built up lifetime immunities to these threats, partial and imperfect though they were. Their gut bacteria had adapted, their immune systems had been educated brutally from the moment of their birth. Yours has not. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We haven't even arrived at the gates yet, and that is where today's story truly begins, at the edge of the most powerful empire the ancient world had ever known, on an ordinary morning in the 6th century before the birth of Christ. The sun is rising over Mesopotamia. Let us walk toward it. Part 3. Dawn. The hour the city breathes. It begins before the sky is even light. Babylon does not wait for sunrise. By the time the first pale gray thread appears on the eastern horizon, somewhere over the flat, featureless plain that stretches towards Persia, the city is already awake, already working, already alive in ways that would strike a modern visitor as both deeply familiar and profoundly disorienting. The first sounds you would hear are the temple bells. The great ziggurat of Es-Agila, the house of the god Marduk, the supreme deity of the Babylonian pantheon, rose from the heart of the city like a stepped mountain of fired brick, its terraced levels ascending nearly 90 meters into the sky. Modern scholars believe this was the structure that inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, a building so audaciously tall that it seemed to its builders to be reaching towards heaven itself. Every morning before the sun rose, the priests of Marduk performed rituals that had been performed in one form or another for thousands of years. They washed the golden statues of the gods. They offered food, bread, beer, dates to divine beings who were understood not as distant abstractions, but real presences, literally inhabiting the temple, needing to be fed and dressed and cared for like cosmic royalty. If you were to wander toward the sound of those bells on your first morning in Babylon, this is the first mistake that might get you killed. Because the temples of ancient Babylon were not public spaces. They were not churches where anyone could walk in and kneel in prayer. They were the private residences of gods. The inner sanctums were accessible only to the highest-ranking priests and, on occasion, the king himself. An ordinary person approaching the restricted areas of Es-Agila without authorization was not simply a rude tourist, they were a trespasser in a divine palace. And the punishment for such trespass was not a polite escort to the exit. This is our first lesson in Babylonian law, and it is a lesson that runs through every aspect of daily life in this city, like a steel rod running through the softest clay. Babylon was, in many ways, the birthplace of law as a concept. The famous Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a basalt stele nearly 8 feet tall, now residing in the Louvre in Paris, was composed around 1754 BCE, more than 1,000 years before the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar. But its spirit, its fundamental logic, saturated Babylonian culture for millennia. The principle was simple, and in its simplicity, it was merciless. Society has rules. If you break them, you will suffer. The Code of Hammurabi contained 282 laws covering everything from property rights and trade disputes to marriage, adoption, and medical malpractice. It was, in many ways, a remarkably just system for its time. But the punishments were calibrated to a world with no prisons as we understand them, a world where the only reliable deterrents were shame, financial ruin, mutilation, and death. Stealing from a temple? death. False accusation of murder that cannot be proven, death. Harboring a runaway slave, death. A builder whose poorly constructed house collapses and kills the owner's son. The builder's own son is put to death. The principle, expressed repeatedly throughout the code, was elegant in its brutality. An eye for an eye, a life for a life, a wound for a wound. As a stranger in Babylon, you do not know these laws. You have not grown up breathing them. You do not know which spaces are sacred and which are profane. You do not know which words are legal and which are criminal. You do not know that even the way you dress, the route you walk, the language you speak, all of it marks you as an outsider, a potential threat, in a city that did not, as a rule, welcome the unknown. But let us say you survive the dawn. Let us say the temple bells fade, and you find yourself standing in the early morning light on one of Babylon's main streets. What do you see? Part 4. The Streets of Babylon. A world of perfect strangers. The processional way. This is the great ceremonial boulevard of Babylon, and it is unlike anything that existed anywhere on Earth at this moment in history. Running from the Ishtar Gate in the north, straight toward the Esagila Temple complex in the south, it stretched for approximately 800 meters, nearly a half mile, and was paved with limestone and red breccia slabs, each one large enough that 4 men would struggle to carry it. The walls lining the street were faced with glazed brick, painted in brilliant shades of blue and yellow and black, decorated with relief sculptures of lions, the symbol of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, each one modeled with such anatomical precision that the muscles seemed to ripple under the ceramic surface. Lions, hundreds of them, stretching the full length of the avenue. To walk down this street on an ordinary morning would have been one of the most visually overwhelming experiences imaginable. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because of the sheer intentionality of it. This was a city that had been planned, that had been built, that had been curated over generations to project a specific message to everyone who entered it. Babylon is powerful. Babylon is divine. Babylon is the center of the universe. And it was not wrong. At the height of its power under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon controlled an empire that stretched from modern-day Lebanon in the west to the borders of Persia in the east, an area encompassing much of what we now call the Middle East. The wealth that flowed through this city was staggering. Merchants from Egypt, from Anatolia, from India brought their goods here. Slaves from conquered territories worked the fields and the workshops and the great construction projects that never seemed to stop. Scholars from across the known world were drawn to Babylon's libraries and astronomical observatories. But here is what would strike you first on that morning street: the smell. Modern cities, whatever their other faults, have systems for dealing with human waste, sewage treatment plants, running water, garbage collection. Ancient Babylon had some version of all of these things. It was, as we noted, a sophisticated city, but they were primitive by modern standards. The main streets were maintained with more care than the back alleys, but even the processional way would have carried the smell of animal dung, of rotting fish, of human bodies that had not seen soap in weeks or months. And soap, true soap as we understand it, was not widely used in ancient Mesopotamia, though a kind of alkali-based cleansing agent made from ash and animal fat existed for certain purposes. You would quite literally be able to smell Babylon long before you could see it, and once inside, the smell would cling to you in ways that would never fully wash out, even if you had the means to wash, which, as we will soon discover, you almost certainly would not. But smell was the least of your problems on that morning street: the people. There would be tens of thousands of them already moving through the city, and to your modern eyes they would be a deeply disorienting sight. The Babylonians were not a single ethnicity. The city was a melting pot in the truest sense, home to Chaldeans, Assyrians,
Arameans, Egyptians in exile after Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jerusalem, Persians, Elamites, merchants and scholars and artisans from across the ancient world. They wore a dazzling variety of clothing, tunics of linen and wool, some plain and undyed, others brilliantly colored in reds and blues and yellows that only the wealthy could afford. Men and women both wore their hair long, oiled and braided and arranged in ways that would require hours of daily maintenance.
They would look at you, and they would know immediately that something was wrong. In the ancient world, every detail of your appearance communicated your identity with the precision of a uniform. Your clothing told people your social class, your profession, your ethnic origin, your religious affiliation, your marital status. Your hairstyle, your jewelry, the particular sandals on your feet, all of it was a form of language, a constant broadcast of who you were and where you belonged in the intricate social hierarchy of the city. You, in your modern clothing, or worse, in whatever you happened to be wearing when you were inexplicably transported back 2.5 millennia, would broadcast only one message: I do not belong here. And that would make you dangerous. Not because the Babylonians were hostile to strangers in principle. Trade and travel meant that Babylon was one of the more cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world. But unidentifiable strangers, people who fit no recognizable category, who spoke no known language, who dressed in inexplicable garments made of synthetic fibers, such a person would be, in the eyes of Babylonian authority, a threat to be investigated. And investigation in ancient Babylon was not a gentle process. Part 5. The Hierarchy. Know your place or lose your life. You need to understand how Babylonian society was structured, because this structure was not merely a social convention. It was quite literally the law, and the law was everywhere. At the very top sat the king. In the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar II, the king was not simply a political ruler. He was the earthly representative of the god Marduk, the divine intermediary through whom the will of heaven was translated into the affairs of men. His word was absolute. His person was sacred. To insult the king was not merely treason, it was blasphemy. And the punishment for blasphemy in ancient Babylon could range from having your tongue cut out to execution, depending on the severity of the offense and the mood of the court. Nebuchadnezzar II himself was, by any measure, one of the most formidable rulers in human history. He reigned from 605 BCE to 562 BCE, 43 years during which he conquered Egypt, destroyed Jerusalem and its great temple, carried the Jewish people into captivity recorded in the Bible, commissioned the Hanging Gardens that became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and rebuilt Babylon into the spectacular city whose reputation has echoed across 25 centuries. He was also, if the historical records are accurate, a man of volcanic temper and total, absolute power. An account in the book of Daniel describes him ordering a furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than normal to execute 3 men who refused to worship his gods. Whether or not you accept the theological interpretation of that story, the underlying reality it reflects, a king who could order death by fire on a whim, is entirely consistent with the historical evidence. Below the king were the nobles, the priests, and the military commanders. Then the merchants and skilled craftsmen, then the farmers and common laborers, and at the very bottom, a category that encompassed perhaps a third of the population, the slaves. Slavery in ancient Babylon was a complex institution, quite different from the chattel slavery of the American antebellum South, and yet no less real in its fundamental violence. Slaves in Babylon could own property. They could conduct business. They could, in theory, purchase their own freedom. But they were also property, bought and sold, and their legal status was fundamentally that of a possession rather than a person. Runaway slaves could be branded on the wrist or had their ears cut off as a mark of their status. and anyone who helped a slave escape faced the death penalty. Where would you fit in this hierarchy? Nowhere. That is the terrifying answer. You would fit nowhere, and in Babylon, fitting nowhere was not a philosophical condition, it was a legal one. And the legal consequences of being an unclassifiable outsider, of having no master, no guild, no temple affiliation, no family connection, no documentation of any kind, were severe. You could be enslaved. Under Babylonian law, an unknown person with no provable status and no identifiable patron was essentially a free resource to be claimed. If a wealthy citizen decided you were useful, if you were young and strong, or if you possessed some skill that could be put to work, they could claim ownership over you with very little legal obstruction. You would have no recourse, you would have no rights, you would have, in the eyes of the law, no voice. This is the moment where most people, I think, begin to grasp the true nature of what we are talking about. Not Babylon as an abstract historical concept. Babylon as a living, breathing system of power and control that would swallow you whole without even noticing. But perhaps you were determined, perhaps you were resourceful, perhaps you managed through some combination of luck and instinct to avoid immediate enslavement. Perhaps you find a crowded market stall to hide behind, and you watch, and you try to understand. What you see next will be the most fascinating and most dangerous hour of your day. Part 6. The Market.
Commerce without currency. The Great Market of Babylon. This is where the city truly reveals itself, where the theoretical splendor of kings and gods comes crashing into the glorious, grinding reality of daily survival. The market, or more accurately, the sprawling collection of markets and trading zones that occupied various areas throughout the city, was the economic heart of Babylon, and it operated through rules so different from the ones you know that even watching from a safe distance would leave you completely lost. Let us begin with the most fundamental question: how do you buy anything? In ancient Babylon, you cannot use cash as we understand it. There are no coins in Mesopotamia at this period in history. Coinage was invented in Lydia in western Anatolia and had not yet spread to Babylon. Trade was conducted through a system of weights and measures, primarily using silver as the standard of value, measured by weight in units called shekels. 1 shekel of silver weighed approximately 8.3 grams. It was not minted into coins. It was carried as raw metal, rings, ingots, irregular lumps, and weighed on balance scales before every transaction. You have no silver. You have no grain, no oil, no cloth, the other primary currencies of exchange. You have whatever is in your pockets, perhaps some modern currency, utterly worthless here. Perhaps a phone, which is a black mirror that does nothing and means nothing. Perhaps some keys to a home that does not exist yet. You cannot eat, you cannot drink, you cannot pay for shelter, and in a city where food and water are already scarce and carefully controlled, a person who cannot buy is a person who is starving. But there is something in the market that goes beyond mere economics. There is information. And information in the ancient world was perhaps even more valuable than silver. Watch the merchants. They know things. They know which noble houses are in favor with the king and which are in danger. They know which temples are distributing food to the poor today and which neighborhoods are rumored to be afflicted with disease. They know which caravans have just arrived from Persia, bringing news of political upheaval, and they know which rumors are going to drive up the price of grain before the news even reaches the palace, and they speak Aramaic. This is crucial. By the time of Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylonia was a multilingual empire, but the lingua franca, the common tongue that bridged ethnic and regional differences, was Aramaic,
a Semitic language that had spread across the ancient Near East with the Assyrian Empire and never quite left Babylonia. Babylonian, the academic and religious language, was still used in temples, in royal inscriptions, in legal documents, but on the street, in the market, in the everyday commerce of the city, people spoke Aramaic. You speak neither, and the gap between you and every single person in that market is not just linguistic, it is total. You share no cultural reference points, no common mythology, no shared understanding of what the world is or how it works. You cannot ask for help. You cannot explain yourself. Every attempt at communication makes you look more confused, more threatening, more like a problem to be solved by authority rather than a person to be helped. This is the loneliness of deep time. Not the romantic loneliness of a traveler in a foreign country, where the beer tastes different and the signs are in unfamiliar letters, but the fundamental human grammar is the same. This is the loneliness of being separated from your species, not by distance, but by time, by 2,500 years of accumulated difference in language, belief, assumption, and basic reality. You are alone in a way that has no modern equivalent. And now the sun is climbing higher. The heat is becoming something else entirely, and your body, your soft, modern, air-conditioned body, is beginning to send you signals that you are not equipped to ignore. Part 7. The Body. What the heat does to you. Let's talk about what ancient Mesopotamia was actually like to inhabit. Babylon sat at approximately the same latitude as Northern California, but there the similarity ended. The climate of southern Iraq, which is what ancient Mesopotamia is today, is one of the most extreme in the world. Summers bring temperatures that regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius, 113 degrees Fahrenheit, for weeks at a time. The Fertile Crescent, the name given to the agricultural heartland of ancient Mesopotamia, was fertile because of the rivers, not because of the climate. Without the Euphrates and Tigris, this region would be desert. Inside the city of Babylon, the heat was worse than in the open country. The dense concentration of buildings, animals, people, and fires created an urban heat island effect millennia before anyone had a term for it. The sun reflected off the pale brick walls and radiated up from the paved streets. There was no shade that lasted. The great date palms that lined the canals offered some relief, but moving through the city, on foot, in a period of late summer, you would be losing water at a rate your body was not designed to manage without constant replenishment. And here is where we must be honest about something deeply uncomfortable. The water you could access in Babylon would, with high probability, kill you. The Euphrates was not merely a river, it was a sewer. The Babylonians discharged waste into the canals that fed from it. Animals defecated on the banks. The dead, both animal and human, were sometimes disposed of in or near the water. The Babylonians knew, empirically, that certain water sources were safer than others, and they had developed practices, filtering through sand, using clay vessels that had antimicrobial properties, preferring canal water that moved over stagnant pools, that reduced but did not eliminate the risk. And they also drank large quantities of beer.
This is not a joke. Beer was a fundamental staple of the Babylonian diet, consumed by men, women, and children daily. It was not the strong, high-alcohol beer of a modern pub. It was typically a thick, low-alcohol fermented brew made from barley, a more nutritious grain than dangerous drink. The fermentation process killed many of the pathogens that made raw water deadly, and the caloric content made it a genuine food source. The famous poem of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest literary works in human history, composed in Mesopotamia thousands of years before Babylon's Golden Age, depicts the wild man Enkidu being civilized partly by learning to drink beer. You cannot drink Babylonian water without significant risk of contracting dysentery, typhoid, or any number of other waterborne diseases that, without modern medical treatment, could kill a healthy adult within days. But you are thirsty now. The heat is extraordinary. Your body is demanding fluid, and the only available option is either beer you cannot identify or buy, or water that will likely poison you. This is how fast Babylon would begin to kill you, not with violence, not with law, but with the simple, implacable reality of a world without infrastructure designed for your immune system. And still, the day is not half over. Part 8. Midday. The hour the gods judge. By midday in ancient Babylon, the streets would be quieter. Not silent, a city of 200,000 people is never silent, but the frenetic energy of the morning market would have settled into the thick, drowsy languor of the midday heat. Sensible Babylonians, those who could afford it to, retreated to the cool interior of their homes during the hottest hours. The homes of Babylon are worth pausing on because they tell us something profound about the character of this civilization. The typical Babylonian house, even for relatively prosperous families, was built around a central courtyard open to the sky. The outer walls presented a blank face to the street, no windows, no ornamentation, nothing that would indicate what lay within. This was by design. In a city where crime was a daily reality and privacy was the only reliable security, the blank outer wall was not unfriendliness, it was wisdom. The richness of the home was turned inward toward the courtyard, toward the family, away from the dangerous, unpredictable street. The courtyard itself would typically contain a well or water storage, a hearth, perhaps a small shrine to the household gods. Family members cooked there, worked there, socialized there. The rooms surrounding it were multifunctional spaces where the same chamber might serve as bedroom, sitting room, and workspace depending on the time of day and the needs of the family. The floors were packed earth or fired brick. The walls were thick enough to keep some of the heat out during the day and retain warmth during the surprisingly cold Mesopotamian winter nights. But beneath some of these floors, Babylonian archaeologists have discovered something that reframes everything we think we understand about this culture: family burial plots. The Babylonians buried their dead beneath the floors of their homes, not as an act of morbidity, but as an expression of continuity, a literal connection between the living and the dead, between the present household and the ancestors whose wisdom and spiritual protection was believed to sustain the family. The dead were part of the household. They were not removed to a separate, distant cemetery. They were there, under your feet, every day. This practice tells us something vital about how the Babylonians understood time, family, and existence itself. Life and death were not opposed conditions in separate domains. They were overlapping states that shared the same physical space. The ancestors expected offerings of food and water from the living. The living expected guidance, protection, and fertility from the dead. It was a relationship that required constant maintenance, constant negotiation. If you were to inadvertently enter a Babylonian home, perhaps stumbling in from the street, desperate for shade and water, you would not simply be trespassing in someone's house. You would be intruding on a sacred space inhabited by both the living and the dead. And in a culture where the spiritual and the legal were not separate categories, this trespass could carry consequences, both earthly and supernatural. The spiritual realm in Babylon was not a metaphor. It was not a comfort. It was a physical reality that surrounded every Babylonian every moment of every day, as tangible as the dust and the heat and the smell of the river. Part 9. The Gods of Babylon. A universe full of voices. This is perhaps the hardest thing for a modern mind to truly grasp about ancient Babylon. We live in a world that has been thoroughly disenchanted, not in the emotional sense. Beauty still moves us, music still lifts us, love still transforms us, but in the metaphysical sense. We know, or believe we know, that the thunder is not a god, that the eclipse is an astronomical event, not a divine portent, that the earthquake is the movement of tectonic plates, not the shaking of a supernatural foundation. We know these things so thoroughly that we have largely forgotten what it felt like not to know them. The Babylonians did not have this knowledge, and the absence of it was not ignorance. It was a different, coherent, internally consistent understanding of how the universe worked.
Abstract beings existing in some separate realm. They were present. They were active. They were, in a very real sense, the world itself. The storm god, Adad, was not merely the ruler of storms. He was storms. The sun god, Shamash, was not simply a deity associated with the sun. In some fundamental way, Shamash was the sun, and the sun was Shamash. This theological understanding had practical consequences for every single aspect of daily life. Disease, for example. If you fell ill in ancient Babylon, the question was not primarily what pathogen had infected you. The question was, which god or demon had afflicted you and why? Illness was understood as a spiritual condition, a sign of divine displeasure, or the action of malevolent supernatural beings called utuku or asaku, demonic entities that attack the human body and soul. The treatment of illness, therefore, involved both what we might call medical interventions, herbal preparations, physical treatments, dietary recommendations, and what we would call religious ones, ritual prayers, exorcisms, divination to determine the cause of divine anger, offerings to the appropriate deity. The physicians of Babylon, the Asu, treated physical symptoms with a surprisingly sophisticated pharmacopoeia. They knew the medicinal properties of hundreds of plants. They performed surgeries. They could set broken bones and treat wounds. But alongside the Asu worked the Ashipu, the exorcist physician, whose role was equally essential to diagnose the spiritual cause of illness and prescribe the appropriate ritual response. You could not separate the medical from the religious in Babylon. They were the same thing. And a sick person who sought only physical treatment, ignoring the spiritual dimension, was understood to be addressing only half the problem, which meant, in the logic of the system, that they would not fully recover. Now imagine you fall ill, which, given the water situation and the heat and your unprotected immune system, is essentially inevitable. You have stomach cramps, a fever, perhaps the beginning of diarrhea that signals dysentery. You need help, but the help available to you is not help you recognize. The healers who approach you are burning incense and reciting incantations you do not understand. They are pressing clay figurines against your skin. They are performing elaborate rituals designed to drive out the demon that has taken residence in your body. They are not doing nothing. Some of their herbal treatments would genuinely have helped, but they are also not doing what your body actually needs, which is rehydration salts and rest in a clean environment. You cannot communicate your symptoms accurately. You cannot explain what you know about germ theory and oral rehydration therapy. You cannot even trust the water they offer you to drink. This is the moment. This is the moment where the gap between your world and Babylon becomes uncrossable, where all the brilliance of ancient civilization, and it was brilliant, genuinely, profoundly brilliant, cannot save you from the simple reality that you are in the wrong time, with the wrong body, facing the wrong pathogens, in a world that has no tools for what ails you. But let us say your immune system fights back. Let us say the dysentery is mild. Let us say you survive the midday heat in someone's doorway, too sick and exhausted to move, too weak to be a threat to anyone, invisible in the way only the desperately ill can be invisible. Let us say the afternoon comes, because the afternoon in Babylon contains something that we have not yet discussed, something that is, in its way, the most extraordinary thing about this civilization.
something that connects this dead empire to everything that came after it, to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the Islamic Golden Age, to the European Renaissance, to the modern world you came from. The Babylonians could read the sky. Part 10. The Astronomers, the men who mapped eternity. High above the city, on the upper platforms of the Great Ziggurat, something was happening every night that should stop you cold. Men were watching the stars. Not casually, not as poetry, though the Babylonians wrote extraordinary poetry about the heavens, with the systematic, meticulous, obsessive precision of what we would today call scientists. For centuries, for more than 700 years before the birth of Christ, the Babylonian astronomers of Babylon had been recording the movements of celestial bodies with a regularity and accuracy that modern scholars still find astonishing. They tracked the planets. They recorded the phases of the moon with such precision that they could predict lunar eclipses centuries in advance. They identified the regular cycles of planetary motion and calculated mathematical models to predict where a given planet would be in the sky on any given future date. They did not have telescopes. They did not have mathematics as we would recognize it, no algebra, no trigonometry as developed by the Greeks. They had sophisticated arithmetic. They had their eyes, their clay tablets, and the one thing that is both the most humble and the most powerful tool in the history of human knowledge: patient observation over time. The Babylonian astronomers, the diaries as scholars call them, some of them have survived. They are inscribed on clay tablets that have been baked hard by the fires that destroyed the libraries they were stored in, which is one of history's great ironies. The very catastrophes that destroyed the buildings preserved the records. And when modern astronomers have checked these ancient observations against their own calculations, the Babylonians were right. Within the margins of observational error, they were right about the cycles of Jupiter and Venus. They were right about the period of the moon. They were right in ways that should make you sit down and think very seriously about the arrogance of calling ancient people primitive.
These were not primitive people. They were people without the tools we have, doing things with the tools they had that we struggle to fully appreciate. They were doing science, not called by that name, not organized by that philosophy, but following the same fundamental logic. Observe, record, find patterns, make predictions, check predictions against observation. And they were doing it on top of a giant temple in a city that would kill you in 24 hours before anyone had coined the word civilization. This is the paradox of Babylon. This is the tension that makes it so endlessly fascinating and so endlessly heartbreaking. This was a civilization of extraordinary intellectual achievement embedded in a social and physical reality of extraordinary brutality. These were the same people who developed mathematical astronomy and who executed criminals by drowning them in the Euphrates. The same culture that produced the world's first systematic law code and enslaved a third of its population. The same civilization that built the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, through the labor of people who had no choice but to build them. Babylon was not a simple place. It was never a simple place. And that complexity, that tension between achievement and cruelty, between beauty and brutality, is precisely why it still haunts us. Part 11. The Laws Revisited. The code that cuts both ways. By late afternoon, the city begins to breathe again. The heat has not broken. It will not break until long after sunset, but the worst of it has passed. The market stalls reopen. The streets fill with people returning from their afternoon rest. And if you have survived the heat, the water, the loneliness, and the creeping illness, you are about to face a new category of challenge: other people.
specifically the mechanism by which Babylon managed conflict between people, the law. Let us work through a few scenarios, completely realistic situations that could arise without any malicious intent on your part, and trace where they would lead under the Code of Hammurabi and the broader Babylonian legal tradition. Scenario 1. You are hungry. You take food from a market stall without paying for it because you have nothing to pay with. Under Babylonian law, theft, particularly from a sacred space like a temple or even a market operating under divine patronage, could be punished by death. Non-sacred theft was punished by the requirement to repay tenfold. If you could not repay, and you cannot because you own nothing, the law provided for an alternative. You could be put to death or enslaved to work off the debt. Since you have no master, no patron, no family to appeal on your behalf, the most likely outcome is that you become someone's property before sundown. Scenario 2. You enter a dispute with someone, perhaps accidentally. Perhaps you bump into someone carrying a heavy load, and the load falls, and it breaks, and the person whose load broke is furious. Under Babylonian law, if you caused damage, even accidentally, you were liable. Not in an abstract civil lawsuit sense, you owed the actual cost of replacement. And if you could not pay, see Scenario 1. Scenario 3. Someone decides you are a runaway slave. This was not uncommon in ancient Babylon. People who fit no recognizable category were sometimes assumed to be escaped property, and there was financial incentive to claim them. If you were claimed as a runaway slave and could not prove otherwise, and you cannot because you have no papers, no master to appeal to, no social context anyone can verify, the law offered you very little protection. None of these scenarios require anyone in Babylon to be cruel. None of them require malicious intent. They are simply the natural operation of a legal system designed for a world of known quantities, a world where everyone has a place, a patron, an identity, a documented history. In that world, it worked. In that world, it was, by ancient standards, remarkably fair. You are not of that world, and the system, encountering you, would process you the way any unknown input is processed, by forcing you into the nearest available category, which would not be a pleasant category. Part 12. Sunset, the hour when Babylon becomes dangerous. The sun is setting over the Euphrates. Let us take a moment to observe it, because it is genuinely magnificent. The light here over flat Mesopotamia, with no hills or mountains to interrupt the horizon, is extraordinary. The sky turns colors that have no names in the English language, deep purples and oranges and crimsons that stretch from horizon to horizon like a burning tapestry. The river, running dark and heavy with silt, catches the last light and holds it for a moment before surrendering to the dark. The Babylonians loved their sunsets. They wrote about them. They incorporated them into their mythology. The sun god Shamash descended into the underworld at sunset to travel through the realm of the dead overnight and emerge again in the east at dawn. The Babylonians watched this happen every single day and understood it as a cosmic event of profound significance. You are watching the same sun set over the same river from roughly the same position on the surface of the earth that the Babylonians watched for 1,000 years, and for a moment, just a moment, the distance between you collapses. You are not a modern visitor endangered by ancient pathogens and incomprehensible laws. You are a human being watching the sky change color, feeling the air cool slightly, experiencing the particular magic of the transition between day and night. And then darkness comes, and the magic turns to something else. Babylon at night was a fundamentally different city than Babylon in the day.
There was no street lighting. The torches and oil lamps that marked doorways and temple entrances provided islands of warm light surrounded by absolute blackness.
Modern people have almost no frame of reference for this kind of darkness. Even in the countryside today, the reflected glow of distant cities ensures that true darkness is rare. The darkness inside an ancient walled city, in the narrow streets away from the main thoroughfares, was so complete that you could not see your own hand in front of your face. And in that darkness lived the category of person that every ancient city produced, those who operated outside the law, or rather, in the spaces the law could not see. Ancient Babylon had criminals. It had thieves, murderers, people who made their living by preying on the vulnerable. It also had something more structured, the demimonde of urban life that exists in every crowded human settlement throughout history. People who could be persuaded to help you for a price. People who knew things they were not supposed to know. People who operated in the gray zones of a society that was, for all its sophistication, organized around hierarchies of power that left plenty of space below and between. You, stumbling through the dark streets of Babylon with no language, no money, no social identity, and a body that is probably running a fever from whatever waterborne pathogen you ingested earlier in the day, you are the perfect victim. Part 13. The Night Sky. What the darkness reveals. But before we arrive at the dark conclusion of our day, I want to stop. I want you to look up. Because if you survive to nightfall in Babylon, if your immune system holds, if you have avoided the law, if you have found a corner to hide in and you are not yet dead from heat exhaustion or dysentery or someone's summary judgment, then you will see something that no modern person living in or near a city has seen in a lifetime. The actual night sky. No light pollution, no overcast smog of artificial illumination, just the ancient sky. The same sky the Babylonian astronomers spent their careers studying, blazing with the full, impossible glory of the Milky Way, stretched from horizon to horizon like a river of frozen fire. Thousands of stars, tens of thousands, patterns that the Babylonians named and traced and mapped with more care than we have given most things in our own world. They named the constellations we still use, the bull, the lion, the scorpion, the great twin gods. These were Babylonian creations, later adopted by the Greeks and transmitted through the Islamic astronomers to the modern world. The zodiac, that circle of 12 constellations through which the sun appears to move over the course of a year, was a Babylonian invention. The very idea of organizing time around celestial cycles, the 7-day week named for the 7 celestial bodies visible to the naked eye, the division of the hour into 60 minutes and the minute into 60 seconds, these are Babylonian gifts, hidden in the structures of modern life so completely that we have forgotten they ever came from anywhere. When you look at the night sky, even today, you are looking through Babylonian eyes. And in this moment, this one moment of genuine connection across the abyss of time, you can almost feel what it was like to live here, to look up at that sky every night, not as a backdrop, but as a living text full of meaning and message and the specific, personal attention of divine beings who had arranged these lights specifically to communicate with the people below. The Babylonians believed the gods spoke through the stars, through the patterns of celestial events, through the movements of planets, through eclipses and comets, and the color of the moon. These were messages addressed to the king, to the city, to humanity. The priests who watched the sky were not idle dreamers. They were intelligence analysts decoding dispatches from heaven. And sometimes those dispatches were terrifying. The appearance of a comet, for example, was understood as a portent of disaster, of plague or invasion, or the death of the king. When such omens appeared, the palace employed a sophisticated system of ritual response, including the practice of installing a substitute king, a low-status individual who would be crowned, given all the trappings of royal power, and then, after a set period during which the bad omen was understood to fall on him rather than the true king, executed. The true king would then resume the throne, cleansed of celestial threat. This was not superstition in the pejorative sense. It was a rational response to a coherent worldview. If the universe communicates through signs, and if those signs indicate danger to the king, then the most logical response is to misdirect the danger. It was the ancient world's version of crisis management. But it also tells you something about the value placed on individual human life in this system. The substitute king was a human being who was deliberately killed to manage a perceived threat. His life was expendable in the service of cosmic accounting. This was not considered barbaric by the people who practiced it. It was considered prudent. This is Babylon, beautiful and brutal, brilliant and merciless. A civilization that gave us the week, the zodiac, the concept of law, the world's first great literature, and also a world in which human life was a commodity to be deployed and disposed of in the service of power. Part 14. Midnight. The Reckoning. It is late now, past the hour when respectable Babylonians sleep, and we need to be honest with you about where you are. You have been in Babylon for less than 24 hours. In that time, you have been exposed to pathogens your immune system has never encountered. You have consumed nothing that your body can safely process. You have wandered through a city whose language you do not speak, whose laws you do not know, whose social structures you cannot navigate, in clothing that marks you as something outside every recognizable category. You have been ill. You have been lost. You have been, in the eyes of every person you encountered, either a threat, a resource, or a problem to be avoided. And the city goes on, indifferent, beautiful, terrible, ancient. Here is what survival in Babylon would have actually required, not superpowers, not violence, just the things that every Babylonian child absorbed over the first 10 to 15 years of their life. The language, specifically Aramaic, the street language, the language of commerce and connection, the social codes, who to approach, how to approach them, what to say, what never to say, how to signal your status and your affiliation and your harmlessness, the knowledge of food and water, which wells were safe, which vendors were trustworthy, which foods were available to someone of your social position, the actual practical survival knowledge of a person born into this specific environment with this specific immune history, and above all, the network, family, guild, temple, neighborhood, the web of human connection that in the ancient world was not merely a social nicety, but the primary mechanism of survival.
You have none of these things, not one. And without them, Babylon is not a wonder. It is a death trap wearing the mask of a civilization. But here is the thought that I want you to carry forward, the one that should stay with you long after the credit roll. Those 200,000 people in Babylon, the merchants and the priests and the slaves and the astronomers and the mothers and the children and the substitute kings, they all had those things. They all knew how to survive there. And they did survive, generation after generation, for thousands of years, in one of the most extreme environments on Earth, with tools and knowledge and beliefs we barely understand. They were not helpless in their world. They were extraordinarily capable in their world. They were, in ways that dwarf most modern human experience, resilient and resourceful and intelligent. They built an empire. They mapped the heavens. They invented the week. They wrote the first literature. They dreamed the first dreams of justice and law.
And if one of them were transported to our world, to a modern city with its traffic and its internet and its invisible social codes and its pharmaceutical dependencies and its catastrophic information overload, they would be just as lost as you are in theirs. They would die just as fast, maybe faster. Part 15. The conclusion. What Babylon teaches us about ourselves. The gates of Ishtar are still standing. Not in Babylon, the original is long gone, its glazed bricks scattered by time and theft and the grinding indifference of 2.5 millennia, but the reconstruction, assembled from original fragments excavated by German archaeologist Robert Koldewey in the early 20th century, stands in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin, and it is one of the most staggering objects in human custody. 12 meters tall, deep lapis lazuli blue, decorated with rows of lions and dragons and bulls in raised relief, each animal executed with such technical mastery that scholars still argue about the exact methods the Babylonian craftsmen used. You can go and stand in front of it. You can look up at the same gate, or its closest surviving approximation, that the exiled Jews walked through, that Nebuchadnezzar himself passed under, that merchants from Egypt and soldiers from Persia and astronomers from the far reaches of the empire entered and exited 100,000 times. And if you stand there long enough and you let the scale of it really land on you, something happens. The distance collapses slightly. Not entirely, never entirely, but slightly. You feel across the vast gulf of time the presence of something genuinely human, not primitive, not alien, human, brilliant and brutal and afraid and ambitious and creative and cruel, in proportions not entirely unlike our own. We did not become more human over the last 2,500 years. We changed the tools, we changed the language, we changed the diseases and the laws and the gods, but the essential project, the building of meaning in the face of chaos, the creation of community in the face of loneliness, the attempt to understand the stars, has not fundamentally changed. Babylon would kill you in a day. But Babylon made you possible. The mathematics that runs your phone traces a direct line back to Babylonian astronomers on top of a ziggurat. The legal principles that protect your rights echo, however faintly, the code of Hammurabi. The week you live your life by, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, named for celestial bodies that the Babylonians tracked with obsessive precision, is a Babylonian artifact, running continuously for over 2,000 years. You carry Babylon inside you. You just don't know it. And maybe that is the most important thing to understand about history. Not that the past was simpler or crueler or more dramatic than the present, but that it is not, in the deepest sense, past at all. It is the foundation we stand on, invisible, unacknowledged, often forgotten, but there, always there. The city fell. Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, and while the city continued to exist for centuries afterward, its great days were done. Nebuchadnezzar entered Babylon in 331 BCE and reportedly wept at its splendor, and then died there 8 years later, under circumstances still debated by scholars. By the time of Christ, the great city was crumbling. By the medieval period, it was ruins. By the modern era, it was a place on a map, a reference in a holy book, a word that had accumulated so many layers of symbolic meaning, sin, decadence, excess, ambition, that the actual place beneath all the metaphor had become almost unrecognizable. But it was real. It was real in the way that only things made by human hands over generations for reasons that matter desperately to the people making them are real. The priests who fed the golden statue of Marduk every morning, they believed in what they were doing. The astronomers who spent cold nights on top of the ziggurat, recording the position of Jupiter to the fraction of a degree, they were doing something they understood to be vitally, cosmically important. The mothers who buried their dead children beneath the floors of their homes and left offerings for them and spoke to them and expected guidance from them, they were practicing a love that transcended death in the only ways their world gave them to do it. That is Babylon. Not a cautionary tale about pride, not a byword for decadence, not a cartoon villain for the prophets to rage against. A city, a real city, full of real people, trying to make sense of a world that was just as bewildering and overwhelming and beautiful to them as ours is to us. And if you could go back, if the gates could somehow open again, if the blue-glazed lions could roar back to life, if the Euphrates could carry you back to that morning in 600 BCE, you would not last a day. But standing at the edge of that impossibility, looking across the gulf of time at everything they built, and everything they knew, and everything they were, you might, just for a moment, not want to leave. Fade to black. The only sound? The slow, heavy current of the Euphrates, unchanged across 25 centuries. End card narration. History does not belong to the past. It lives in everything we have built on top of it. And civilizations like Babylon, civilizations we could not survive for a single day, are the foundations of everything we take for granted. The question is not whether we could survive their world. The question is whether we are worthy of what they left us. Think about it, and remember, the week you just lived, every day of it was a Babylonian gift.